Hi, everyone. I want to talk today about a smaller news story that, at least in my feed, isn't getting a whole lot of play, but that I do think is important in the present climate and also kind of sets precedent in my opinion, not a great way. So let's jump in. This story comes out of Virginia. This was a Virginia trial in Alexandria and involves a man by the name of Peter Stinson. This case was essentially a freedom of speech question, and it was trying to determine if certain things that we say are constitutionally covered in our First Amendment right, or if it crosses the line into solicitation of violence or a call to violence. That was the premise of the case. So, a little bit of background on Peter Stinson. He's a 63-year-old gentleman, and he used to be part of the Coast Guard. He was a individual in the military. Um, I don't think that that necessarily matters one way or the other. All kinds of different people serve in our military, and we're very grateful for their service. This case, um, I think we need to be able to remove ourselves from his background in that sense, because I think that when a question of crime is brought up, your background shouldn't matter. That's a platform generally on the conservative side, which is that your identity doesn't determine who you are. So we have to look at the facts of the case, not who he is. And in some of the coverage that I'm seeing, that comes up. And this story was mostly covered on the right, so it doesn't come up in those particular stories. There was some coverage on the left, and you see a little bit of like trying to justify the outcome of the case, which I will talk about my opinions of this case later, but let's just let's just talk about the facts for a second. So he's brought on charges of or he's accused of solicitation of violence, which is essentially a charge meaning that you reasonably were inciting violence with your rhetoric, with your words, which is an argument made on the left a lot. And this ties into other recent news that I'll get into, but I'm going to try to stay focused here. So he made posts on X and Blue Sky at the time, because these posts were from around 2020, 2021. So at the time, I believe X was still Twitter, but that doesn't matter. Um, the accusation was essentially that he was encouraging violence. So some of the posts that he made were I'd pull the trigger, but I'm not a good enough shot. Let's just shoot the orange and put him out of his misery. And uh, this one I think is particularly pointed, which is he says on X, sure, this is war. Sides will be drawn, and Tifa always wins in the end. Violence is inherently necessary. And we can talk about, I suppose, the um, platform, the mode in which these things are being said, which is that it's online and not isn't talking specifically to anyone. But I think that it is pretty clear by just the quotes and the words themselves that these are calls to violence. And this is unsettling because of how the case turns out, which is unanimously, which that part isn't as shocking because juries have to decide in a unanimous fashion. Otherwise, it's a I believe the term is hung jury, which is not everybody can agree on how to proceed. Juries don't function like a democracy where it's like more people think this, so we're gonna go with that. It's everybody has to decide unanimously. So that's not the part of it that is disconcerting. It's that they didn't deliberate for all that long. And I'm not saying that you have to deliberate for a long time, but for such a critical issue, for something that will set precedent and that will impact future cases, I think that that's a little bit shocking. So to deliberate for only 2 hours and to come back with a verdict of not guilty. So this man was acquitted and he was found not guilty for his remarks, basically saying that his remarks are covered under freedom of speech. I think this is kind of crazy because it's essentially saying that you can, in full ferocity, call for violence. You can say violence is necessary. You can say we should kill this person, and it's covered under freedom of speech. And this is where we really get into the weeds of it because I have met free speech absolutists, and in their opinion, literally anything goes. I am not a free speech absolutist. I think that there are some lines to be drawn, but they have to be um you have to be able to outline a criteria for what those lines in the sand are, and they there can't be a lot of them. They have to be used very, very, very sparingly, and I know that this gets somewhat arbitrary, but I think that in order for us to maintain a civil society, one where we can have healthy discourse, you have to protect people's ability to say, I guess, enraging things or controversial things. But you cross a line when you start encouraging behavior that would adversely impact society. So, the example that's brought up a lot is calling fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. This results in action by others, by society, that is detrimental to the well-being of other people, right? You can incite panic, you can cause someone to be trampled, um, and these are generally regarded as not good things, especially when it's based on a lie. This is a little bit different because it's not necessarily based on a lie, but it does. You can argue objectively that this does um, adversely impact society. I mean, if you look at what has happened recently, we've had political assassination attempts. We've had a successful political assassination, and to make the argument that this doesn't create a rhetoric, it just it doesn't seem logical, especially when you look at other recent news that's coming out where there are people on the left right now. There was that gentleman who was on, I forget what news program and I forget what his name is, but he made the claim that high-ranking Democrats are not calling Trump fascist and they're not calling the conservative base Nazis. Why would they make that claim if what they're saying doesn't create rhetoric? Why would they make that claim if if simply saying those things does not result in some kind of action on behalf of other people? And I just, for me, it feels a little bit contradictory because on the one hand, you have a court case that just decided that you can literally say everything up to and including let's shoot someone. But on the other hand, you're saying that saying stuff like that doesn't isn't a call to action, isn't a call for violence. Um, but also, meanwhile, for the past 5, 10 years, people on the left have been saying that um, you have to turn down the temperature because the rhetoric that is being espoused is creating a hostile political climate. So there's like all of these components just they don't add up to me because either we stand firmly on words matter and we cannot uh, allow incitement or calls to violence, or we have to stand firm on the complete other side of, I guess, free speech absolutism and say you can say anything and everything and we'll deal with the consequences if and when they arise. I personally am not a free speech absolutist. I do think that you need to have some parameters for your speech because, like I said before, if what you're saying is adversely impacting society, then it's a fine line. We have to tread it carefully, but you have to set up those parameters. People do well with boundaries, generally speaking, and I think we just need to get back to a more honest interpretation of the First Amendment, which is you can say controversial things, but you cannot solicit violence. You cannot call for violence. And if you disagree with that, let's talk.